Let's queer up the USA view. U.S. Labor Department to honor 3 individuals who fought for LGBTQ+ employment rights. The United States Department of Labor has announced a date that it will honor 3 LGBTQ+ people who fought for equal rights in the workplace and won a landmark U.S. Supreme Court ruling 3 years ago. Gerald Bostock, Aimee Stephens, and Donald Zarda were the plaintiffs in the Supreme Court case Bostock versus Clayton County, where the justices in 2020 ruled 6-3 that LGBTQ+ people are protected under Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which prohibits discrimination on account of sex. Stephens and Zarda will be honored posthumously. The Labor Department will be honoring the trio by adding them to the Labor Hall of Honor on Wednesday, October 18th at 1 p.m. at the department's Frances Perkins Building in Washington, D.C. Before the Bostock decision, anti-discrimination protections for LGBTQ+ workers consisted of a patchwork of laws and regulations that varied from state to state, and over half of the states offered no protections to LGBTQ+ workers. By winning the employment discrimination cases before the Supreme Court after years of litigation, these 3 plaintiffs extended workplace protections for millions of LGBTQ+ workers across the country. So I am tipping my proverbial hat off to them, because I was one of these people too. I was fired for being gay. This is, sometimes people forget what it was like before gay marriage was passed. And this wasn't that long ago. It was in the early 2000s. And I remember watching a bunch of Lifetime movies about gays from the past in the 80s, 70s, 80s, 90s, where you could be fired for being gay. And I remember thinking around that time, I'm so glad I'm in the 21st century where these things don't happen. And I remember it was probably the most offensive thing to date in my life to be called into a room at my workplace and sat down and asked if I was gay. And at that moment, I mean, I still have a little bit of PSD from this moment of, at that time, you know, we weren't nearly as accepting in society still, even though the 21st century was before gay marriage, and I wasn't out to my family. And I don't know if these 3 people were out to their family either, but when your sexuality gets discussed and it's in a board meeting and you live in a smallish town, things get out. And it made me have to come out to my family at that moment. And a lot of litigation years later going on about that, but I finally kind of came out a bit victorious in that situation. But it was a very, very difficult struggle in my life.
Daddy, I want to interrupt you. I want to ask you, how old were you when you went through this?
I was 36, maybe.
And what were you doing job-wise? I'm not asking the business, but
yeah, it was technically it was a religious institution, but my position did not have to be part of that religion. So anything I wanted to do outside of the religion was fine, but being gay was a step too far. Yeah. And so I didn't have that protection, and I was, I guess, considered a deviant. And yeah, it was a very, very difficult time. And these 3 people, you know, I looked up their stories a little bit. One of them was a skydiver, and he was fired, and which is not usually a position where your personal life is considered, whether, you know, you're a skydive instructor. And he told a woman he was strapped to, who might have been concerned that, you know, I'm very close to a dude who might be wanting to hit on me, or, you know, we're like back to back, you know. Yeah, exactly. And he said something to the effect of, "Don't worry, I'm gay." And that's what got him fired and the fact that that could have been something in that industry that had nothing to do with religion or morality where he could be fired, it was horrible. And only one of them is still alive to see this victory happen. So I tip my hat off to all the people who have been fired or gone through workplace discrimination, and thank you for help paving the way.
Wouldn't it have been nice to give these people their flowers when they were alive?
Yeah, absolutely.
But I think this circles back to our original conversation about the black cat, you know, and us being able to remember history. It almost seems like there consistently is a fight that's happening in our current, you know, view, and it's not in our rear view. Like there's some type of struggle that we're walking through. So being able to appreciate where we've come from, it almost feels like, you know, we're dealing with another crisis right now. So we can't spend that moment where we celebrate those wins or that victory, i.e. the black cat, or how far we've come with Stonewall and things of that nature.
Yeah.
You know, yes, Bostock made it so we can't be fired for being gay. But DeSantis and the administration here and in Texas and other Republican states are essentially putting in a don't ask, don't tell policy in our schools and other public institutions to protect the children. So yeah, you can't fire us for being gay, but according to DeSantis, you can still be fired for talking about it at your workplace. There are, like you said, there are still fights to be fought.
I do want to draw some history comparison. Bostock, for a lot of people in our community, they've heard of Bostock, but they perhaps may not understand how important it is. So I'll compare and contrast it to other marginalized groups. In the Black community, Board of Education is a sentinel Supreme Court decision in the history of Black community in America, forcing the integration of schools in the United States. Bostock is that kind of thing for the LGBTQ community. The decision of Bostock was to say that even more important than you can't be fired, your story I didn't know, Trini, and is amazing. I'm going to ask you lots of questions another time about it. But the issue of what the Supreme Court decided in Bostock is more important than the decision of discrimination. It extended the rights of the 1964 Civil Rights Act into the LGBTQ community. Was the first time that the Supreme Court made that decision, just like Board of Education for the Black community of integration. So it basically said we're elevating LGBT for the first time in legal precedents from the Supreme Court decision that you have constitutional protection, that you can never again be completely destroyed, which up to before Bostock always was the universal conclusion. And why is that so important? Last year is just another example in a very conservative Supreme Court, 6-3 conservative Supreme Court. They used the launching point of Bostock to protect trans rights because of the interpretation of the 64 Civil Rights Act. It is so sentinelly important for our history. It is a landmark moment. And if you didn't know the story I just told, it's indicating that you don't know enough about our history in our community. And if we forget our history, we're doomed to the mistakes that we've made leading up to it.